The courtroom was packed, yet strangely silent. Every seat filled, every gaze fixed on a woman sitting alone at the defense table. She wore a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back neatly, no makeup, no jewelry. She looked like someone who had accidentally wandered into court, not someone about to turn the entire room upside down. Judge Hallstrom adjusted his glasses, glanced at her, and smirked. "Miss Claire, is it?" he said, flipping through papers with exaggerated impatience. "Are you quite sure you don't want an attorney? This isn't a traffic ticket. The charges against you are serious." Clara's voice was calm. "I understand the charges perfectly, Your Honor." A few people in the audience exchanged amused looks. Some even chuckled. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, whispering loudly, "This'll be quick." The judge sighed and tapped his pen. "Very well, but you should know representing yourself in a case like this is unwise." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm aware." When the prosecutor began, he spoke with confidence. Too much confidence. He strutted across the room, waving documents as if he were performing for an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is straightforward. The defendant mishandled company funds, failed to report transactions, and violated compliance regulations. The evidence speaks for itself." Clara watched him patiently, her expression unreadable. Finally, it was her turn. She stood slowly, quietly, so quietly that the prosecutor snorted, assuming she was already nervous. But the moment she opened the folder in front of her, something changed. The judge leaned forward. The audience's whispers faded. Even the prosecutor stopped smiling. Her voice, once soft, now carried a sharp clarity. "Your Honor, I will begin by addressing prosecution's first claim. The mishandled funds were part of a redundant audit flagged 2 weeks prior. The records submitted by the prosecutor are incomplete. Page 3 of Exhibit A is from an entirely different fiscal year." The courtroom shifted. The prosecutor blinked, confused. "What? That's not, it can't." Clara continued, her tone steady, precise, almost surgical. "Furthermore, the missing signature he mentioned wasn't required under compliance protocols until after the date in question. That regulation wasn't implemented until the amendment passed on March 17th. The prosecutor seems unaware of the timeline. People in the audience leaned forward. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Judge Hallstrom frowned, flipping through the regulation book at his desk. His brow tightened. He looked up at Clara with a different expression now, one that held caution. Clara stepped closer to the projection screen. "And now, Your Honor, regarding those irregular transactions, I'd like to present the actual full ledger, the one that includes the pages the prosecution omitted." She handed the judge a binder. He opened it and froze. "These entries," he muttered, "they contradict the prosecution's evidence." The prosecutor's face drained of color. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware. Someone from the company. There must have been a mistake." Clara didn't stop. She reached into her bag and placed a final envelope on the desk. "And just to clarify my role in the company, since the prosecution described me as an untrained assistant, this is my certification from the state bar. I've been a licensed attorney for 8 years. I simply chose not to disclose it yet." The courtroom erupted. Gasps filled the air. Judge Hallstrom stared at her, speechless. "You're an attorney?" Clara nodded softly. "I drafted the very compliance protocols I'm being accused of violating." Silence swallowed the room whole. Judge Hallstrom straightened, suddenly far more respectful than before. "Miss Clara, continue." Clara stepped forward, confidence radiating now, not loud, not arrogant, but undeniable. "As I was saying, Your Honor, the truth behind these allegations is deeper than the prosecution presented, and I'm ready to show exactly who orchestrated this." She opened another folder. Inside was a document that made the judge's eyes widen and made the prosecutor jump to his feet in panic. But before he could speak, Clara calmly turned the page and continued presenting evidence piece by piece, exposing connections no one in the courtroom saw coming. And at that moment, even the judge knew this wasn't a simple woman defending herself. This was a legal genius unveiling the truth, and the real battle had only just begun. Clara slid the next page across the judge's desk with calm precision, but the effect was anything but calm. The judge's eyebrows lifted, his expression sharpening, as if someone had just switched on a brighter light in his mind. "This," he muttered, scanning the document. "This is a transfer authorization." "Correct," Clara said. "Signed not by me, but by the company's chief financial officer, the same individual who claimed I was responsible for the irregularities." The prosecutor swallowed hard. She can't possibly have. Clara gently interrupted. "I also have access logs from the company's security system showing I was not even in the building during the alleged unauthorized transactions. But the CFO was." The audience murmured. The judge rubbed his forehead, looking almost irritated. Not at Clara, but at the sudden realization of how deeply flawed this case was. Clara stepped toward the center of the courtroom, her movements measured and deliberate. "Your Honor," the prosecution presented doctored pages. The one person who had both motive and access to manipulate financial records was the CFO. "And if allowed, I can demonstrate exactly how he rerouted funds into a private account under an alias." The prosecutor slammed a hand on his table. "Objection! None of this was disclosed in my office." Clara turned her head slightly, and for the first time, she allowed herself a subtle smile. "Because your office did not request full discovery. You asked only for the documents relevant to your argument. So I brought the documents relevant to the truth." A wave of laughter and disbelief washed through the courtroom. Even the judge couldn't hide a tiny smirk. He lifted a hand. "Overruled. Miss Clara, please continue. The court is very interested." Clara nodded, retrieving her laptop from her bag. As she connected it to courtroom screen, an intricate flowchart appeared, a detailed map of every financial movement in the company during the last 3 months. People leaned forward. It was a kind of diagram only a seasoned attorney or a top forensic analyst could create. "This," Clara explained, "is the trail of transactions. Notice how each suspicious transfer originates from the CFO's terminal. Notice also that the timestamps match his personal calendar entries. And note that the audit he blamed on me occurred during hours when I was logged in remotely drafting legal documents for a separate department." The prosecutor was visibly shaking. He whispered to his assistant, "How did we not see this? How did she get all of this?" Clara didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her voice was cool and steady. "You didn't see it because you didn't look. You assumed the simplest explanation because I looked like the simplest person in the room." The judge's gaze softened. Even he seemed to recognize the weight of her words. Clara moved to her final point, her tone dropping to something more intense, almost razor-sharp. "Your Honor, these allegations were fabricated as retaliation. I discovered internal misconduct months ago and refused to stay silent. I was threatened, and when threats failed, they attempted to destroy my reputation. But they underestimated the one advantage I had." The judge leaned forward. "And what advantage is that, Miss Clara?" Clara held his stare, unblinking. "I know the law better than the people trying to use it against me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, but Clara wasn't finished. "Now," she said calmly, "I would like to introduce one final piece of evidence, an internal email written by the CFO himself. It details a plan to shift blame onto me and manipulate the upcoming audit." The judge's eyes widened. "Do you have this email?" Clara nodded, not triumphant, just resolute. "I do." She reached into her folder and pulled out a printed sheet, placing it before the judge. Judge Hallstrom read the email again, as if hoping the words would rearrange into something less damning. But they didn't. Every line was a confession. Every sentence exposed the plot. And every paragraph proved that Clara was not the villain. She was the target. He set the paper down with slow, deliberate care. "Miss Clara," he said, looking directly at her, "this appears to be an internal communication between senior staff. How did you obtain it?" The prosecutor leaned forward, desperate for a foothold. Yes, Your Honor, exactly. How'd she get that?" "That email wasn't part of discovery, meaning it's inadmissible and—" Clara raised a hand, her expression still calm. "It is admissible, Your Honor, and I obtained it through the company's legally required data retention system. As the former legal advisor for compliance, I had authorized access. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. You what? Clara turned her gaze toward him, her eyes steady, unwavering. I helped design that system. I know exactly where every archive communication is stored. A woman in the gallery whispered. She's brilliant, Clara continued, her voice soft but cutting with precision. And I retrieved this email the day before my termination. When I realized they were setting me up, I preserved it, along with 38 other documents related to this case. A murmur of disbelief spread through the courtroom. The judge straightened, now fully attentive. Miss Clara, are you telling this court that the prosecution's entire case is built on manipulated evidence? No, she said. I'm telling you something worse. She walked back to her table, opened her binder again, and pulled out another stack of papers. The prosecution built their case on information provided directly by the CFO and his legal team. They didn't verify it. They didn't cross-check dates, transactions, or authorizations. They simply assumed the simple woman was the obvious culprit. The prosecutor clenched his jaw. That's not, Your Honor, she has insinuated my office acted negligently. No, Clara said, turning toward him. I'm stating it plainly. A sharp inhale traveled across the room. Clara continued, undeterred. You accepted documents without checking for metadata inconsistencies. You submitted incomplete ledgers without verifying whether they were the latest versions. You cited regulations without confirming the dates they went into effect. She paused, then added quietly, and you underestimated me. Judge Hallstrom lifted a hand toward the prosecutor. Sit down. Let her speak. The prosecutor sank into his chair, red-faced. Clara walked to the center of the courtroom again and held up the email. This message shows the CFO planning to bribe an internal auditor and discussing how to select me as a scapegoat because, and I quote, she's too quiet to fight back. The entire audience erupted, but the judge slammed his gavel. Order, order. Clara waited until silence returned. Then she placed the final evidence on the judge's desk, a small flash drive. This contains a full version of every financial record, every audit report, every internal memo, and every single person in the courtroom held their breath as the CFO stood trembling in front of Clara. Moments ago, he had been the untouchable executive, confident, condescending, certain no one would ever uncover what he'd done. But now, his voice cracked like someone standing at the edge of a collapse. Clara, please, he whispered. Step outside with me. We can resolve this. Clara didn't move. She didn't even blink. Resolve, she repeated softly. You mean hide? A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Judge Hallstrom's voice boomed from the bench. Sir, you cannot approach the defendant without permission. Return to your seat or you will be removed. But the CFO didn't even turn toward the judge. His eyes remained locked on Clara, desperate, pleading, cornered. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he stammered. It was supposed to be temporary. A small shift in numbers. I planned to put everything back before the audit. You have to believe me. Clara tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a surgeon might study a patient before the first incision. Is that why you falsified documents? Why you deleted transaction logs? Why you bribed an auditor? Why you blame me? Each question landed like a blade. The CFO's face twisted. Clara, listen. No, she said quietly. You listen. She took one small step forward, and the entire room seemed to lean in with her. You targeted me because you thought no one would believe a quiet woman over a powerful executive. You thought I'd be too intimidated to fight back. You thought I was weak. The CFO swallowed, his voice cracking. I misjudged you. Clara's tone remained calm, almost gentle. No, you misjudged the truth. Judge Hallstrom banged his gavel. Sir, sit down immediately. But before the bailiff could escort him away, the CFO suddenly dropped to his knees. Gasps exploded through the room. Clara, I'm begging you, he said, tears gathering in his eyes. Don't present the rest of the evidence. My career, my family, everything I built. That, Clara said quietly, is something you should have thought about before trying to destroy mine. The judge nodded firmly. Miss Clara, If you are able, please continue with your presentation. The court needs to hear the full truth." Clara turned away from the kneeling executive and walked back toward the center courtroom, her presence steady and composed. The screen behind her changed to a new slide, new evidence, new revelations, and the energy in the room tightened like a wire. But before she could speak, the prosecutor jumped to his feet, panic written all over him. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess." The judge glared. "For what purpose?" The prosecutor's voice cracked. "To reassess our position." Clara looked at him, the faintest hint of irony touching her expression. "You mean to reassess how wrong your position was," she said. The audience murmured. Judge Halstrom leaned back, studying Clara with new eyes that saw the quiet woman before him not as a defendant. Maya stepped forward, her calm presence slicing through the rising tension in the courtroom. The judge watched her with narrowed eyes, clearly believing she was walking straight into a trap he'd set. But Maya didn't flinch. She placed a thin stack of papers on the podium. "Your Honor," she said softly, before continuing, "I'd like to submit this document into evidence. It concerns the timeline of Mr. Dalton's business transactions." The judge raised a brow, amused. "Go ahead. Let's see what you think you found." The opposing attorney smirked, arms crossed, already confident Maya would embarrass herself. But the moment the judge skimmed the first page, his expression slowly shifted. First confusion, then to disbelief. Because the document wasn't just a timeline. It was a forensic breakdown. A perfect reconstruction of the company's financial records, revealing someone had altered timestamps, moved funds through ghost accounts, and forged approval signatures. And every fraudulent action pointed back to one name, the opposing attorney's client. The judge looked up, stunned. "Ms. Rivers, where did you get this?" Maya answered calmly, "From the defendant's own filings. The inconsistencies were subtle, but once I traced the digital metadata, something your court's IT department missed, the entire scheme unraveled." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The opposing attorney paled, flipping through his own documents, only to realize she was right about everything. The judge leaned forward, the mockery from earlier erased completely. Now he spoke with careful respect. "Ms. Rivers, this level of analysis isn't something a typical litigant could uncover." Maya gave a faint, knowing smile. "I never claimed to be typical, Your Honor." For the first time, the judge looked genuinely unsettled. "Who are you exactly?" Before she could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. A senior official from the Attorney General's office stepped in, scanning the room until his eyes locked on Maya. "There you are," he said, relieved. "We've been looking for you. The AG needs you downtown now. It's urgent." Everyone turned toward her in shock, including the judge. The official continued. "If she's finished exposing this fraud, we need her expertise on a federal case. She's the best analyst we have." The judge's jaw dropped. Maya finally turned back toward him, her voice steady. "As I said, Your Honor, I just prefer to stay in the background." Then she gathered her files, ready to walk away as the courtroom erupted in whispers of awe and disbelief. The judge stood frozen as Maya headed toward the doors, the Attorney General's official waiting beside her. But before she could leave, the judge cleared his throat. "Ms. Rivers." "Maya," he said, his voice no longer condescending, but humbled. "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Today, you didn't just defend yourself. You upheld the integrity of this courtroom." Maya paused, offering him a small, sincere nod. "All I ever wanted was for the truth to stand on its own." The opposing attorney, still pale, was approached by two officers who escorted him out for questioning. His client followed, shouting protests that no longer mattered. Their scheme had been exposed so thoroughly that there was no path left to escape consequences. As the courtroom emptied, a few spectators approached Maya, thanking her for standing up not just for herself, but for justice. She responded politely, though her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd done this many times before, in shadows far away from public view. Outside the courthouse, the crisp air greeted her as the AG's official opened the car door. "You really shook that place," he said with a grin. "They never expected someone like you to walk in and rewrite their entire case." Maya chuckled softly. That's usually how it goes. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, she glanced back one last time. She had come quietly, been mocked publicly, and left hailed as the brilliant mind who dismantled a fraud in minutes. But to her, it wasn't about prestige. It was about protecting people who didn't have her voice. The AG's official handed her a new file. Thick, complicated, high stakes. Ready for the next one? He asked. Maya opened the folder, scanning the first page. A new mystery, a new injustice, a new truth waiting to be uncovered. She closed it gently. I'm always ready, she said. And with that, the car disappeared into the city, carrying the quiet woman who outsmarted a courtroom, exposed corruption, and walked away not as a victim, but as a hidden genius whose brilliance kept justice alive.